maybe to our level a little bit more, okay? Let's talk about forgiveness. And first, before we talk about forgiveness, we're going to talk about resentments. You know, resentments, they're a little bit like pebbles in your shoe. Anybody gone hiking? And you know, if you get a big pebble in your shoe, you know it right away, right? You stop, you take it out, and it's done. I went hiking one time, and there was like just a little tiny thing in my sock, and I did not feel it. I didn't feel it until like 5 miles in, and my foot was completely bruised, and I had to get back out, right? That was a hard hike. I think I lost a toenail over that one. Little tiny things. You can walk and, you know, they're there, right? Until all of a sudden, you know it, you feel it, and you are bruised. Resentments can be like that. The big ones you know about. When you've been really hurt or betrayed or something big has happened, you know it. And, you know, then the question is what to do about it. But there's no question about whether you know it or not. The little tiny things of life are what can really zap us. Because we don't tune into them. We don't know it until all of a sudden they're big. And anybody who's been married for a while knows that, right? You just put up with it. It's just a little thing. And you just put up with it until all of a sudden you blow up. And the other person's like, what? Yeah, resentments. So the first thing I'm going to urge us to do this morning, practically speaking, is just to become aware without shame, without blame, without, you know, like, oh, that's such a little thing, why am I upset about that? Just let yourself be aware of resentment in your life. And I'm guessing that when you bring that into consciousness, you will be surprised. You will be amazed, actually, at how many little things and big things you're carrying around. So, my first practical tip this morning on this whole subject of forgiveness is observation, awareness. You know, again, without any shame, without any blame, without denial, just awareness. Begins to wake you up. It begins to wake you up. It wakes you up to how much you hold on to, or get aroused by in a negative kind of way, or subtly annoyed by in a way that zaps your energy, or noticeably annoyed by in a way that makes other people want to steer clear of you. Resentments can drive addictions. Resentments can have a hand in disease. Resentments can rob you of pleasure and happiness, but they are with us all the time. And the less aware we are, the more powerfully they affect us and our relationships. So right off the bat, like I said, before we get too far into forgiveness, this is the first practical point. Let yourself know and feel resentment. Right? Big and little. Maybe it's to God. Maybe this morning it is to God for not answering your prayers in a timely manner or in the way that you think would be best. Okay, so now I've kind of brought us into an uncomfortable place. A bit of blood pressure rise kind of place. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave us there. You didn't come to church this morning to be reminded of all that is not right. But I want us to know right off the bat that the readings this morning, that all the readings this morning, they're about real life and real issues. And they have a real potential for us for healing. Okay, so the first step towards hearing these readings is ones that are meant for you and me in our lives right now, is to become aware of some of these spiritual and emotional discomforts that we simply have become accustomed to. So resentment or lack of forgiveness would be another way to put that. Lack of forgiveness is like pebbles in our souls, in our hearts, and they cause us harm. We confess that we have not loved God with our whole heart and our whole mind and our neighbors as ourselves. That's a very real confession. It's a true confession for all of us. Okay, so now what? What can we do about it? How are you doing with forgiveness in your life? Right? How are you doing with that? Forgiveness of your body for aging, falling apart. Forgiveness of our politicians. Forgiveness of your spouse who went missing in action when you were trying to get the kids ready. Forgiveness that you had a great breakfast this morning, but many had nothing to put into their tummies. Forgiveness that the oceans are rising and the bees are disappearing. Forgiveness that your grown kids don't call as often as you want. Forgiveness of yourself for your gross errors in judgment that have resulted in disaster, but also for the small ways that you sabotage yourself. Forgiveness. How are you doing with that? And what can we do about it? Forgiveness is one of the 8 pillars of joy that we read about in the book of Joy. It's the pillar that elicited the most heated discussions in our group. It sounds so good and so right, and yet the reality of it is so hard. How does it actually work? I mean, how do you actually do it? Forgive. Extend forgiveness to those actions and those people that seem so unforgivable. So there are some amazing stories of forgiveness that I can tell you, and that book with the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu is stock full of amazing stories of forgiveness, including both of these men who are now in their 80s, who have lived through harrowing experiences that could easily have left them scarred and soured, and yet both of these men laugh easily and clearly completely enjoy life. They don't harbor any strain of entitlement that life should have been other than exactly what it offered to them, which for both of them has been a mixed bag of privilege and pain. They exude gratitude for the moment and for whatever the moment brings. And they both witness that forgiveness is the key to it all, to joy and to happiness. So here comes the second practical point I want to share with you this morning. Give up any sense of entitlement you might have about how fair life should be. Right? Just give it up. Meet it on its own terms. Life on its own terms. Open your hand. Just drop any sense you might have that life should have gone differently than it has for you. This is your life. This is it. Grab a hold of it. It's where God is, right here, in the midst of your very circumstances. And find whatever tiny bit of gratitude you can and express it. Joseph got there. Joseph got there. I mean, these brothers over whom he weeps and embraces, they are the same ones who sold him into slavery, because of whom he spent long years in prison. He's come a long way when we meet him this morning. He's not that self-satisfied young kid in a beautiful robe that, elevates him above all his brothers. He's a mature man. He's weathered some real tribulation, some real hurt, and his ego has been gradually transformed into a leader whom others can trust to safeguard their lives and their wealth and their health. He has spiritual insight. He understands that while God didn't cause all the pain he's been through, God has used it for good. God has been with him the whole time. And so here's the third practical tip. Remember, the first one is just observe. No shame, no blame, just observe. The second one is give up any sense of entitlement that things should be any different than they are. They are what they are. Grab hold of it. Find a little bit of gratitude. And this third point is to trust that God is at work in every circumstance, not causing every circumstance, but able to work in every circumstance for good. Now, when you begin to trust even just a little bit, you can begin to be released from the grip of wishing and wanting things to be different. Because it's that wishing and wanting for things to be different, that's that's what ushers in a world of pain and lack and resentment. And you're physically as well as spiritually unable to see the resources that are right in front of you that might make a difference. Joseph trusted that God was at work, even when he was in the deep pit that his brothers had dug for him, even when he was in chains, even when he was hungry and cold in prison, and now elevated to one of the highest positions in Egypt. He continues to trust that God is at work. And that trust all the way through enabled him to see the tiny bit of room he still had to maneuver. The resources that were still available to him, as small as they might be, even when it looked like the worst had happened. And because of that abiding trust, he could welcome events in such a way that God could use him for good. So our fourth and final practical point this morning is the way forgiveness works is that it takes practice. And if you just take home this psalm and just recite it to yourself, it's a good psalm. Don't fret. Don't fret because it looks like the evildoers, those people that cheat and steal, it looks like they're on top. Well, it does look like they're on top. It looked like they were on top back then. It still looks like they are on top. But don't fret yourself. Just commit your way to the Lord, do what's right, and continue in that way, and you will be vindicated. So this is the way of forgiveness. You don't start out with the massively big things that your parents did to you when you were little, okay? Or the guy or the woman who, betrayed you big time. Don't start out there. Start out with the little things and just practice, daily practice. When Peter came to Jesus and he said, how many times should I forgive somebody? 7 times? He thought 7 times, that's a lot. Jesus is going to say, yeah, that's good. No, Jesus said, oh no, 70 times 7, which is like, that's, what? But Jesus is like, he's talking about the way forgiveness works. It just works, you just do it day after day after day in small ways and get accustomed to living that way. Now, one final point I want to make, and that is that forgiveness does not mean that people are not held to account for their deeds, right? It doesn't mean that we don't put the bad guys in jail or we don't, remove ourselves from situations of harm. That is not forgiveness. No, forgiveness has boundaries and it holds people to account. So just let's lay that to rest. It does not mean being a doormat or putting yourself in harm's way. What it does mean is not letting other people, what other people do, define you or affect your story of your life. It means using everything, knowing that God is at work in everything, and becoming the leader, the mature, spiritual being that you were meant to be. Forgiveness is the key. May God help us. Amen.